Hi friends, in this video I will be reading 2 more chapters from our book, Winter of the Ice Wizard. If you are following along at home, we are on chapter 7. And if you remember yesterday, we left off where Jack and Annie had gone into the Frost Giant's cave, and then they heard him come back, so they ran to hide, and they were crouching in the dark and burying their faces and just waiting. And they know that if they look directly at the Frost Giant, they will freeze to death at once, so they're kind of freaking out. So we are on page 67, chapter 7, The Frost Giant. Which, with each breath from the Frost Giant, a blast of cold wind swept through the hollow. Jack trembled. He felt chilled to the bone. The giant's breathing grew louder and stronger. Jack squeezed his eyes shut as icy wet wind rushed against his body. Jack crouched lower and held on tightly to Annie. The giant's breath howled like 100 ghosts through the hollow. Jack thought of the Blue Norn's words. He is a blind force of nature that spares nothing in his path. But then the giant's breathing seemed to grow a bit softer. What's happening? Jack wondered. The breathing grew softer and softer. Maybe he's going to sleep, Annie whispered. The breathing became calm and steady. The wind died to a light breeze. I think the Frost Giant is sleeping, Annie whispered. We should try to sneak out of here. Okay, but keep your eyes down. Just look at the ground, whispered Jack. Right, whispered Annie. Their heads bowed. Jack and Annie crept cautiously across the floor of the hollow and began climbing up toward the crack. Jack's teeth chattered, but he couldn't tell if it was from cold or fear. Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the night. The Frost Giant screamed with windy rage. He was awake. Jack was blown to the ground. He tried to crawl across the snow, but he didn't know which way to go. He was afraid to look up. Jack, this way! Annie's voice called from above the roar of the giant's breath. She helped him up, and they struggled together against the wind. Finally, they came to the crack in the wall. Jack and Annie scrambled through the crack. Outside, the wild wind knocked them over, and they tumbled down the side of the hill. The wind swirled across the snow and plain. Annie, Annie, Jack called. Where was she? Where was the sleigh? He couldn't see anything, and he couldn't stay on his feet. The wind roared even louder. An avalanche of snow came crashing down the hillside. When it hit the ground, the snow exploded into great clouds of white powder. Jack! Jack! Jack heard Annie's voice in the screaming wind. He tried to stand up, but snow kept falling on top of him until he was completely covered. Jack lay buried under the snow. All his strength left his body. He knew he should dig his way out, but he was too cold and too tired. He was too tired to look for Annie. He was too tired to fight the Frost Giant. Instead, he closed his eyes and he drifted into an icy sleep. Jack dreamed that the cold fur was brushing against his face. He dreamed that a wolf was digging around him, nudging him, pushing him, sniffing him. Jack opened his eyes. He felt dazed. At first he couldn't see, but he could feel that he wasn't buried in snow anymore. He wiped off his glasses and he saw a lone moon and some stars in the clear sky. The Frost Giant must have left, Jack thought, but then he heard a panting noise. He sat up and looked around. One of the white wolves was crouching right behind him. Jack scrambled to his feet. Go away, he shouted. The wolf stepped back and growled. Go, 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 shouted Jack. He picked up handfuls of snow and he threw them at the wolf. The wolf backed away a few more feet. Jack looked around wildly. Annie was lying very still on top of the snow. The other white wolf was sniffing and pawing at her. Jack's anger made him fearless. Leave her alone, he shouted. Go away. He scooped up more snow and threw it. The wolf stepped back. Go, go, shouted Jack. Get away. Leave us alone. He glared angrily at the 2 white wolves. The wolves stared back at Jack. Their yellow eyes gleamed. I'm not kidding. Go, Jack shouted. Jack stared fiercely at the wolves. Finally, the wolves looked away. They glanced at each other and then slowly backed off. They looked at Jack and Annie one last time, and then they turned and trotted away over the snow. Jack rushed to Annie. He knelt beside her and lifted her head. Wake up, he said. Annie opened her eyes. You okay? Jack asked. Yes, I dreamt about white wolves, Annie murmured. Me too, said Jack. And then when I woke up, they were here. They were about to eat us. Really? Annie sat up and looked around. Yeah, but I scared them off, said Jack. What about the frost giant? Annie asked. He's gone too, said Jack. Come on, let's get out of here. Jack helped Annie up from the snow. Do you still have the wizard's eye? Annie felt her pocket. I got it, she said. Good. Jack looked around. Beyond the heaps of fallen snow, the silver sleigh was waiting for them. Overhead, the sky had turned to a light shade of gray. It's almost dawn, said Jack. Remember what the wizard said. We have to bring his eye back by the break of day, or we'll never see Merlin or Morgan again. Jack held Annie's hand, and they trudged together through the snow. When they got to the sleigh, they climbed inside. Annie took her place at the rudder, and Jack pulled out the windstring and untied a knot. A breeze rocked the sleigh. Jack untied a second knot, and the sail began to fill. He untied a third, and the silver sleigh moved forward, gliding over the white ground. Swish, 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 the sleigh moved through the thick snow and away from the hollow hill. As they sailed over the white plain, the sky was turning from gray to a pale pink. We have to go faster, said Annie. Jack untied the fourth knot. The wind whistled in his ears. The sleigh picked up speed. Annie steered it past the rocks and over the sea ice. She steered it over the plain, south to the palace of the ice wizard. When the sleigh drew close to the palace, Jack tied a knot and they began to slow down. He tied 3 more, and the sleigh came to a stop. Jack and Annie looked around in the faint, cold light. I wonder where Teddy and Kathleen are, said Annie. They said they'd meet us here at dawn. Jack studied the vast white plain, but he saw no sign of their friends. He wished he had Kathleen's visions. I hope they're okay, he said. I hope they didn't run into the white wolves. I have a feeling the wolves wouldn't hurt them, said Annie. The wolf in my dream seemed nice. Dream wolves are different from real wolves, said Jack. I don't think we can wait for them, said Annie. The eye has to be back in time for the sun before the sun comes up. The eye, said Jack. We never looked to see if it was in the hailstone. Annie reached in her pocket and pulled out the hailstone. She held it up. Jack gasped. Staring out at him from inside the ice was an eyeball. It was about the size of a large marble. The eyeball was white with a sparkling blue center. Oh, man, whispered Jack. It's beautiful, isn't it? Said Annie. I don't know about that. Jack felt a little queasy. Seeing an eye outside of a human head was too weird for him. Put it away for now, he said. Annie put the hailstone back in her pocket. Jack looked around. The sky had brightened from pale pink to red. A thin sliver of the sun was peeking over the horizon. The sun! Cried Jack. Hurry! He and Annie jumped out of the sleigh and charged toward the palace. When they got to the entrance, Annie stopped. Look, she said, pointing to big paw prints in the snow. Wolf tracks! Oh no, said Jack. Do you think the white wolves are inside? That's weird. It doesn't matter. We have to go in. Hurry, said Annie. They rushed into the palace just as a fiery ball of the sun rose over the horizon. Chapter 8. Return of the Eye. Jack and Annie walked through the front hall of the palace, past the ice columns and into the wizard's throne room. The walls and floor glittered with the brilliant, cold light of dawn. Uh-oh, said Jack. The wizard was waiting for them, and the 2 white wolves were sleeping on either side of his throne. Jack was confused. Why are they here, he wondered. Do they belong to the wizard? The wolves lifted their heads and sniffed the air. Their ears picked up. When they caught sight of Jack and Annie, they sprang to their feet. They stared at them with piercing yellow eyes. The ice wizard was staring intently at Jack and Annie, too. Well, he said, did you bring back my eye? Yes, said Jack. Annie took the hailstone out of her pocket and held it up to the wizard. Jack watched the wolves nervously as the hailstone passed from Annie's small hand into the wizard's large, rough hand. The wizard stared down at the chunk of ice. Then he looked at Jack and Annie. Indeed, you are heroes, he said breathlessly. Not really, Jack murmured. The wizard looked again at his eye inside the hailstone. Then, with a quick movement, he slammed the ice chunk against the arm of his throne. Jack and Annie gasped and stepped back. The wizard slammed the hailstone against his throne again. This time, the ice cracked. The wizard gently pried his eye out of the heart of the hailstone. He lifted the frozen eyeball into the air and studied it in the light. Then, with an eager cry, he ripped off his eye patch. Jack and Annie watched in amazement as the wizard fitted the eye into its dark, empty socket. Jack held his breath. He was horrified yet fascinated. He couldn't imagine someone just shoving an eye back into his head. The wizard slowly lowered his hand. He seemed to be holding his breath. He had 2 eyes, but the new one didn't move. It looked as if it was still frozen. Jack grew worried. If the eye didn't work, the wizard might not help them. We brought you your eye, he said, so you can tell us where Merlin and Morgan are now. The wizard jerked his head to look at Jack. He covered one eye with his hand. Then he covered the other. In a frenzy, he went back and forth, covering and uncovering each eye. Finally, the wizard dropped his hand and roared, "No!" The wizard's howl shook the ice columns. "You have tricked me." "No, we haven't," said Annie. "This eye is useless," cried the wizard. "It has no life, no sight." "But that's the eye you gave the Norn," said Annie. "You promised if we brought it back, you'd give us Merlin and Morgan." The 2 white wolves threw back their heads and howled. "No!" cried the wizard. "You tricked me! You tricked me!" "Let's get out of here," whispered Jack. He pulled Annie toward the ice columns. "Stop!" shouted the wizard. "You cannot escape me!" He grabbed Merlin's staff of strength. The wolves growled and yelped. The wizard pointed the staff at Jack and Annie, and he started to say a spell. "Row-ee, wait!" someone yelled. Teddy burst into the throne room. "Wait, wait!" The wizard held his staff in the air. He stared wildly at Teddy. His face was twisted with rage. "We have something for you," Teddy shouted to the wizard. "Kathleen!" he called. Kathleen stepped out from behind the ice columns. With her was a young woman with long braids. The woman wore a flowing dress. Around her shoulders was a white feathered cloak. Her eyes rested on the wizard, and the radiant smile spread over her face. She began walking slowly toward the throne. The wizard lowered Merlin's staff of strength. He stared back at the young woman. All of the color drained from his face. For a long moment he was still as a statue. Then an ice-blue tear leaked out of his frozen eye and ran down his white cheek. Jack and Annie stood with Kathleen and Teddy. They all watched the young woman and the ice wizard gaze silently at each other. "Is she his sister, the Swan Maiden?" whispered Annie. "Yes," whispered Kathleen. The Swan Maiden spoke to the ice wizard in a strange language. "Val-e ven awan." The wizard did not answer. Tears flowed gently down from both of his eyes. "Val-e ven owan," the Swan Maiden said again. "What's she saying?" Jack asked. "She's saying I have come back to forgive you," said Kathleen. The wizard stood up. He walked down the steps from his throne. He gently touched the Snow Maiden's face as if to make sure that she was real. Then he answered her softly in a strange language. "Fel-Owan." "How did you find her?" Jack asked Teddy. "A seal took us under the ice to the Isle of the Swans," said Teddy. "When we found her, I told her how much the wizard has missed her," said Kathleen. "I also told her about the 2 of you and how you always help each other, and I told her how she should return to her brother and be his friend again." The wizard and his sister kept speaking softly to each other in their strange language. Warm sunlight shimmered through the palace windows. Annie stepped forward. Excuse me," she said. The wizard looked at her. "My sister has returned home," he said with wonder. "I can see with both eyes now. I can see perfectly." "I'm glad," said Annie, "but you must give Merlin and Morgan back to us." The wizard looked at his sister, and she nodded. The wizard held out Merlin's staff of strength. "Use this to bring them back," he said. "Hold it tightly and call out for them." He gave the staff to Annie. Annie could barely lift it by herself. "Hold it with me, Jack," she said. Jack stepped forward and grabbed the magic staff. The smooth golden wood felt warm and vibrant in his hands. As they gripped the staff together, Annie threw back her head and called out, "Merlin and Morgan, come back!" A long burst of blue light shot out of the end of the staff and flashed toward the 2 white wolves. Suddenly, wolf eyes changed into human eyes. Wolf noses changed into human noses. Wolf mouths into human mouths. Wolf ears into human ears. Wolf fur into long red cloaks. Wolf paws into human hands and feet. The two white wolves were gone, and a man and a woman stood in their places. Wow, that's a cool picture. All right, boys and girls, we are going to stop there. And tomorrow we only have one more chapter, chapter 9. So we will read the rest of our book tomorrow and find out how it ends. Bye, kiddos.